Hey guys, Jack Spirko here. Wanted to talk to you guys today about planted tanks. And for those that are familiar with my channel, you know that fish tanks is just a hobby of mine. And being kind of an internet personality through my podcast, I share some of my things that don't really have to do with the podcast and the things we talk about. And one of my big hobbies is and has been for a long time aquariums and fish and tanks. I love fish. I love water. I'm the kind of guy, if I go somewhere and there's a pond, I'm there staring on it for hours just to examine, you know, what's going on there. Are there fish in there? What kind of ecosystem is it, etc. I am not, though, an expert on aquariums, and this video is not meant to be like what you should do with your tank, and if you don't do it, you're wrong and you're stupid. It's not that at all. And while I think I set my first aquarium up in 1986, sounds about right. So that's a bit of a while ago, and I've had a lot of aquariums and tanks and worked with a lot of fish species over the years. I'm actually relatively new to planted tanks. I would say in earnest about a year of messing with them. So these are really things I've learned over the last year, and it's been really a fun journey. And what I've realized is that I learned a ton of stuff about planted tanks that I didn't know just a year ago. And a lot of it I learned right here on YouTube from some really great people that I will be mentioning today. And I probably won't mention all of them because I don't have them all in my notes over here. But I will put a link to like all my favorite YouTubers that are into planted tanks in the video notes below here. So if you're like, I came by this guy's channel and I don't know him from Adam, and you know, what is the basis of these 25 things that you should know about doing planted tanks? It's just my experience over the last year and learning a lot, doing a lot of research, talking to good friends who are into the hobby as well. And it is done with a level of humility. Like, just because I say something doesn't mean you have to do it. And therefore, if I get any comments like, you're a big idiot, you don't know, everybody knows that you're supposed to delete, banned, done. I don't deal with stupid people. And people, when you're just putting out information that you've learned to try to be helpful, that do that, they never contribute anything. And it's a funny thing, guys, whenever you look at their channels or any of the things, you know, like, do they have a blog? They never have anything to show. They just have a big ass mouth via keyboard, and I don't deal with those people. I run my channel on this philosophy: you never argue with an idiot, because they drag you down to their level and they beat you with experience. One more thing before we go on. Whenever I do videos like this, especially when people see me that have never seen me before, they notice that this left eye is like over here. And they comment like, why don't you look at the camera? Why are you looking up? I'm blind in this eye. I'm not completely blind, but it's something like 2250. And I have about that wide of a field of vision out of it. So when I'm not wearing my glasses and I have a nearsighted thing, so I can't wear them when I'm doing this, it just kind of goes off. Sorry, you don't like me, don't look at me, but maybe you'll listen to me. So let's start off with planted aquariums and kind of where I'm coming from with this. And again, you don't have to do anything I'm saying. I'm just giving you kind of my anecdotal experience here on what I've come up with over the past couple of years. Number one, I think that most people should start with a 10-gallon or a 20-gallon long or something like that. And if you already have tanks, if you've been doing aquariums and you haven't been doing planted aquariums, I did for years really high-end like silk plants and fake plants and hardscaping. The tanks always look good. Things were a lot easier if a silk plant got some algae on it. You could just take it out and throw it in some peroxide and water or some heavy algicide and kill it. You could just take it out, stick it out in the sun for a couple days, bake it, and stick it back in your tank. So it's easier, right? So if you have other tanks, then you should use whatever you have. But if you're going to go out and buy a tank and make it your first planted tank, the reason I say to do either a 10 or a 20 gallon, it'll give you all the experience you need to get started. It'll become a seed tank for you with plants where you'll be able to produce so many plants out of that tank that you can build other tanks with. And if you do things like breeding neocardinia shrimp, I have a couple shrimp tanks, just 10-gallon shrimp tanks, that are just, I'm going to be like throwing free shrimp at people soon. And so if you start that way, it's cheap. You can go buy a 10-gallon tank at Walmart for $15, sometimes around $10. You can get a 20-gallon long at Petco for around $30. And then don't buy kits, right, with this first tank, because you're going to throw the lights away. The hood's pretty useless. The filter is probably going to be a lower end filter. You're going to end up hot rodding that filter anyway or what have you. And we'll talk about that in a second. So like you're going to be paying for a lot of crap you're not going to use. With an exception. Sometimes you'll see some of the tanks like in a 20 gallon, 29 gallon size. 29 is a decent tank to start with too. Where the kit is so cheap, you end up paying about the same for the kit as you would just the bare tank. And you could probably use the filter. So, okay, go ahead and do that. But just know the lights that come with these kits are crap. They're not going to work for you in a planted tank stage. And a 10 to 20 gallon, it's easy to move if you have to drain it down, you know, 3/4 of the way and move it. You can find space for it. And it's big enough to be relatively stable if you take your time as you move forward with it and you don't rush it. Next up, I love the whole 100% natural tank thing where it's a dirted tank, it's got a gravel cap, there's no filtration, it's a 100% balanced ecosystem. I set it up and let it run for 2 months with nothing but snails and maybe a shrimp or two. I've got 2 little 3.5 gallon nano bowls right over there that are turning out to be pretty cool. And that's exactly what I'm doing, no filtration. But I think for your first tank, you want to have success, get off the ground, and not have a bunch of problems. Use filtration and use something like a canister over the back filter, something like that, your standard mechanical filter, and get yourself an air pump and use a sponge filter. Sponge filters are cheap. You can get them between $5 and $15 depending on size on Amazon. I'll put a link to a few of the ones I like in the video notes below, so you can check out some of the ones that I use. As far as an air pump, you can get anything you want, but I think it's a place to make a good investment because you can always use it somewhere else later. And to me, the AHEEM pumps are they're quiet, they're powerful, they work. The company's great at honoring warranties, so that's where I would go. But the reason I say to use a mechanical pump, you know, something that has this pumping and moving water, and a sponge filter, even though we're going to talk about putting a sponge on the mechanical filter, is that I'm a prepper, right? I teach preparedness. That's what I do. 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So you have your mechanical pump on there, and you got your little motor down there that's running that intake, and it's spitting water out of there and running it through that mechanical filtration. Yay, great. It's all working just fine. And that pump just goes and burns up because it happens. And it happens at 5:30 in the evening. You just turn the lights off. You got your lights on your plant automated. You have it in the back bedroom. You go out and live your life. You don't check on it till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning. Maybe it's a weekend. You go out and have a couple beers. You know, you go have a good Yingling or something like that. And you come in at like noon to check on your tanks. You're going to find floating dead fish, aren't you? Probably anyway. A good balanced tank, you may not. But it's just not a good thing. What if you go away for a weekend and it just happens like the minute you leave? It happens. If you have an air pump running, a sponge filter, and a mechanical filter running in the same tank, the odds they'll both die on you before you notice and take corrective action very low, so you'll be able to take it. Also, hot rod your filter. I'm not going to get deep into that. Corey from Aquarium Co-op has a great video on that, but put an intake sponge on it. Throw those replaceable cartridges they want to sell you, just throw them away. Now, if you want to use them for a little while when you first set the tank up and you're dealing with trying to balance it, that's fine. But they have carbon in them, and that carbon is going to take a lot of the bad stuff out. But if you're fertilizing, you're trying to get nutrient in your tank, grow plants, it takes a lot of the stuff you want out too. So just get rid of them and go with something like bio rings, use lava rock, use sponge, but use something that when you have to service it, you take it out, you rinse it off, and you put it back in. Don't create a recurring cost for yourself. That's what all of the stock filters do with those inserts. And if you watch Corey's video on hot rodding a filter, you'll understand why it's just such a better way to go. Because you're going to get so much better biological filtration, which is really the most important component to it. But definitely use an intake sponge. On intake sponges, here's a little one. I got this from Corey at Aquarium Co-op. But I went to the bigger sponges for my big tanks, my 55s and my 40 breeders. And the problem with them is they have a much larger hole than the typical intake tube. So what Corey says is like put them in there, put them up against a glass, push them up against them. You know, the problem with that is it doesn't really then create a seal, and I don't think you get a good flow through the sponge. So I use this stuff all the time in my daily activities on my little farm here. This is aluminum fencing wire for aluminum electric fencing. So this goes out and it connects on each end to a charger. And when an animal comes to try to eat your other animals, it gets zapped through this stuff. That's what this is for. And again, this is the aluminum stuff. It's cheap. You can get a great big roll of it, and it does a lot of things really well. It's aluminum. It won't rust. It's not going to cause any problems in your tank. You're only going to use a piece about that big. And if you're that worried about it, use something you're more comfortable with. Just take that, wrap that around the filter where it goes onto the intake, and it'll hold it kind of like that right there, and you'll have a good pull through. And it's, if you do it like that and don't try to Rambo it down, it'll still slide off for you when you need to service it. So that's something I recommend. And whenever you clean one of these filters, what they say to do is use aquarium water. So you do it during a water change, put some aquarium water in a bowl, take this thing in there and just squeeze it out, and it's disgusting. It blows you away what comes out of these things. You can do that if you live like I do, where you have a well for well water that you're using to replace your... I don't think it needs to be in aquarium water. You're not gonna squeeze all the bacteria out of here. What they don't want you to do is, if you have municipal water with chlorine in it, you stick it in there, it can adversely affect the bacteria you've worked so hard to build. So definitely consider using those. I believe that fertilizer is your friend. Again, I love the whole no fertilizer, no CO2, no air pump, no nothing. And you can build systems like that. Again, I'm working on some of them now. But if you want easy, right from the beginning, again, I'm a big fan of Corey over at Aquarium Co-op. Easy Green Fertilizer. Use this stuff. 1 pump per 10 gallons. Do that once a week. And that's all you have to do. He makes a nano formula as well if you're using nano tanks under 10 gallons. Another reason I recommend you start out with a 10 or 20 gallon, because then if you get yourself a tube of this, it's 1 or 2 pumps a week to fertilize your plants. This has all the micro and macro nutrients in it. It was the first product like it on the market. I bought this little bottle of it. I started using it in my tanks. Everything started blowing up. I went and got a great big jug of it to refill, but I still got quite a bit of it left here. If you don't want to buy, if you, like me, if you have nano tanks and big tanks, there's no need to buy the nano version of this. He did that because people wanted it. You can figure out how much you need to add of this and make your own nano formula using this as a concentrate. I won't get into that. If you can't do that math, go ahead and buy the nano version of it. But fertilizer is your friend. Root tabs are great. When I set up a tank and I'm putting in my substrate all the way at the bottom of the tank, so I know it's not going to get in the water column, this is what I've been using. And I think you can use probably any organic fertilizer. A lot of people are using a fertilizer called Oscoat. I have some problems with that I won't get into today. This stuff here, beneficial bacteria, beneficial microorganisms, a 4-4-4 balanced fertilizer. I've been using this for my gardening and things like that for years. It is my favorite go-to fertilizer. I just had it around. I thought, well, I'm setting up a 10-gallon tank, a $15 10-gallon tank. If I put this crap in it, it kills everything. I won't do it again. You learn as you go. Had great results. Every time I've used it since then, I've had great results. I'm running a trial right now where I set up 2 tanks basically the same way. One fertilizes, one without. I pretty much think I know the way that's going to come out. But any kind of a heavy root feeding plant is going to love something like that added to your substrate. So I think fertilizer is your friend. Learn about it. Go easy. If you're not sure, use less than the recommended amount. And my big suggestion with fertilizers, with any kind of a carbon product that I'm not going to get in today, but like Flourish Excel or something like that, you need to make sure if you're going to put that stuff in your tank, the lights come on, the stuff goes in, and it gets the entire photo period once it's been dosed, so that the plants can deal with whatever else you've added there. If you do that at night, you're probably going to melt or kill some plants. So that's just another thought there. I also believe that you really should, if you want to do a planted tank, either use a dirted tank technique. I'm not going to go into all the things about it, but basically we're going to lay down an organic potting soil sifted is what most people use. But you can use dirt from your garden, just bake in the oven at about 225 degrees for about 30 minutes. It'll kill anything in there that you don't want. And I've done it without it just to see what happened, and that worked too. But you never know what you're going to get into a system if you do that. But if it's a new system, you learn something, right? Again, it's a $15 tank we're talking about setting up. But the dirt, or I've really become a fan of some of the prepared substrates for aquariums. Carib Sea Eco Complete. Some people like, it killed all my fish. It made my pH 9.7. No, it didn't. It's bath salt. Okay, it didn't make your pH 9.7. If you, I don't know what you've done, but it ain't eco-complete today. It didn't kill all your fish because there's tons of people using it. It's a good substrate. There's a lot of other good ones, but use something like that. Do not use plain old gravel. You can fertilize the hell out of it. You can try to mineralize the hell out of it. If you have an old tank that's been there a long time and it's built up a lot of fish poop and stuff down in there, gravel will grow pretty decently. But if you're starting a new tank, either go dirted or a prepared substrate, and you are going to have much better results. There's another one of my videos on the bowls you can see where I show the difference between an Amazon sword plant in a very established tank in gravel. And when I put it into the Eco-Complete, you would almost think I moved it to a tank with CO2 injection. And I don't use any CO2 injection at all, at least not right now, because the leaf form actually changed. It made the plant so much happier. So I'm going to recommend you do that. Next, get a decent set of planting and you know, scraping tools and scaping tools. So most people have probably seen sets that include tools like this online. I got a set that has, you know, the 2 sets of the tongs, 2 sets of the scissors, and, you know, a little scaping tool that's basically like a little fan brush for your substrate for moving stuff around. I really like it. I got one of the better ones. You can get them for like 10, 15 bucks. This is a heavier grade stainless. These are like $45. I'll put a link in the video notes to the set that I got. What I noticed on Amazon, though, is a lot of people were bitching that even this expensive set was not real stainless steel because they got some rust on there, so they know. Stainless steel. Stainless steel, okay? You can rust stainless steel, especially in certain situations, and what you generally get is surface rust. And these things will come, you know, when you buy the more expensive ones, in a nice little carrying case like this. That's nice. It's pretty. It's cool. You can make your videos on YouTube like you're a surgeon when you're getting ready to go and lay them out like that. But in the end, don't store them in here. This is a transportation case, not a storage case. This thing's going in my closet, and I'll worry about it later if I ever need to take them somewhere. I have a hang on the back of my door rack, like for a pantry for canned goods, with holes in it. When I'm done using these tools, I take them out of the water, I give them a good wipe down, and then I put them hanging like that through the back of that thing, and I keep all my cleaning supplies, I keep all my fertilizers, I keep my fish food, my netting, all that stuff on the back of that door. And my office door stays open most of the time so you don't see it. So it's back there whenever I need it. That's another little hack you can use. But I have never had any rust show up on these tools. You can say you dried it, and if you put it in a foam-lined case like that and seal it up for a couple weeks before you touch it again, it's going to rust. But let me tell you, these types of tools make everything easier when it comes to planting and moving things around your tank. They're definitely worth the investment, and if you take care of them, which basically means wipe them off and hang them somewhere to dry instead of putting them in a sealed case, they won't rust on you. I have found personally, even though these ones with a little bend look cooler, these seem to be more useful for actually planting plants. Before I spent the money on them, I thought I was smart. I just went to my wife's little first aid kit and got a little set of these forceps, like first aid forceps, and I'm planting plants, and I'm cutting them and breaking them, trying to get them down in the substrate. These just work so much better. Little bended ones here, they're worth having because there's certain times you're trying to get something back into a spot or reach around something, and they make it easier. But I think even though they don't look as cool, these are more practical. When it comes to the scissors, the shears, I'm really a fan of the ones with the little curve to them because I've never had a situation where I needed them to be straight, but I've had situations where you want to get in and you want to level things off without putting your arm up to your armpit down in the tank. They work really good for that. Definitely recommend a set of those. You also want to have a good scraping tool to scrape algae off your glass, though I think you should clean your glass before you need to, before algae gets on it, because it's there before you can see it, and if you clean it, you know, with your weekly or at least bi-weekly maintenance, you won't get much algae on your glass. I bought one of these tools here. I thought this was really cool. It's got a specially made little blade. They're not much money to buy 10 of them, but it's a special blade, and it goes there. And there's another piece. If you have a really deep tank, you can extend the length of it further. It works. It works okay. It's not worth the money, and it uses a proprietary blade. I don't like proprietary. Not if I don't have to have proprietary. See that? That's a razor blade scraper. Uses a standard, straight razor blade. This will clean the algae off your glass. This will help you with other projects. Once a year when you have to change the sticker in the windshield of your vehicle, we'll take it off. If you have a tank that needs to be resealed, you need to take the old silicone out of it. This works for that. It's cheaper, and it uses standard blades, and it does other things. I also have one with a longer handle, but it's out in the garage for a project that I'm doing. I'll put a link to where you can get these on Amazon, and this is what I recommend for that usage. Next, and some people are going to really take exception to this, and you're going to be mad at me because they have great forums they're part of, and they've learned a lot from it. But in general, I think you should avoid forums, especially for some reason the old school forums. Like, I mean, I used to love forums in all walks of life, but it seems like the old bulletin board forums, like the people left there when everybody moved to social media, they're the people that worry about everything and they believe everything they've ever read. And what I find is, you know, people saying things as though they're absolute truth about, if you do that, you'll kill your fish. If you do that, you'll kill your plants. And I don't want to get into all the fear-mongering, but there's a lot of it. And I agree with some of the really informed people that I've heard speak on this. I don't think it's necessarily fear-mongering. I think people really think they're helping. And here's an example of what could lead to that. Right behind the camera, I have two 10-gallon tanks running Neocardania shrimp. One are red cherries and one are blue dreams. The blue dreams are not producing anywhere in the numbers the red cherries are yet. They're doing okay, but the red cherries like explosion. I did both of those tanks with lava rock, and I thought cherry shrimp would love lava rock. And they'd be able to hide babies down in all those little nooks and crannies, and it would be like a whole new biology. So I'm talking lava rock like you get in a bag for your grill or for landscaping. And so I set them both up with lava rock, both with some cholla wood, both with some java moss, basically floating plants. Basically they're the same. They're almost 100% the same as each other. And so had I set one up, you know what I'd be saying? Man, lava rock is the shit. Lava rock is the key, man. You do lava rock, look at this. If I had only done the blue shrimp with lava rock, I'd be saying, man, lava rock, I don't know what it does. It screws up the breeding of cherry shrimp. And it doesn't. It's just for some reason, maybe it's the shrimp I started with. I got them from two different places. You know, probably what I'm going to do is bring some more genetics into that blue shrimp tank. I'll put in another order and bite the bullet and spend the big, because they're expensive little buggers, aren't they? But, you know, once I get that breeding population up, this is again why I love 10-gallon tanks. That's a seed tank. Not only does it make plants, it makes shrimp. And I think shrimp need to go everywhere, except in tanks with fish that are going to eat all of them. Because if you put like my little cherry shrimps in with my big angels, they'll just suck them right down. They can't go with the cichlids. But if shrimp can go in a tank, I think they should go in a tank. But again, watch out for the forums and social media too. Watch out for when anybody says to you, but I read on the internet, just assume you're talking to a loudmouth drunk in a bar. He might be right. He might be right. Just because he's a loudmouth drunk in a bar doesn't mean he's not right. But he also could be wrong. And what happens is we take all this information in, and unless we find direct conflict, we end up just accepting it all. And it leads to a lot of mistakes, and it leads to a lot of failures, and a lot of frustration, and people thinking they're doing something wrong, and freaking out. And guys, I'm going to say this too. Let's not act like a freaking fish is a puppy dog. I see people online whining like, oh my God, my fish. I know you care about your animals. I want you to do a good job of trying to take care of them. But I had a good friend that kind of really helped me out when I started in this industry many years ago, or in this hobby many years ago, named Valerie. And what she said is, fish die. It's what they do. So let's not get overly concerned because the fish died. It's not a puppy, it's a fish. It's a lower life form. I'm sorry. All right. So I also want you to take pictures of your tanks over time, like every week. And I don't care if you share them online or whatever, just use them for yourself. It's like when I used to work and travel, you go away, you come back, you notice your kid grew that week. When you don't travel, you're like, the kid's the same as he was. And when the relatives come, they're like, oh my God, he's gotten so big. You don't really notice the progress in your tanks as much as it's incrementally getting better and better and better. By being able to look at it, you know what's happened, you know if it's getting better or worse, and usually it is getting better, so you stay encouraged. Because this stuff takes time. We're building worlds here. We're building ecosystems in a jar. So when you take the time to take those pictures and document it, You also can go back and see, well, like, did this coincide with something I did differently? So if you know you started using something you never used before, and you go back and look at those pictures, you can actually see maybe the problem was there before you did it, or maybe it wasn't. It helps you zero in on what you did. So definitely I think it makes a lot of sense to take pictures on what you're doing. I think you should start with a low-tech tank, no CO2. If you can do that, you can end up doing anything, and it's less stuff to learn. So what I mean by that, yes, filtration, yes, heat, dirted or prepared substrate bottom, decent lights, and that's really about it. And then put your plants in, get things going a little bit, give it a little time before you put the fish in. I will admit, I fast cycle new tanks. I've got so many tanks that when I know I'm going to be getting a new tank in, if I'm going to put a sponge filter in it, I throw a sponge filter in one of the other tanks and run it. And by the time that new tank comes in, that thing's colonized. And I take water out of my other tanks, and I'll have fish in there the day I set up a tank sometimes. I've been doing this a long time, and I'm willing to accept that I could lose the fish I put in there. I'm willing to accept it could get out of whack. You probably shouldn't. You can, but that's the risk you're taking. But start with low tech, no CO2, get decent lights. Probably my favorite value light, and again, I got to throw another shout out to Corey at Aquarium Co-op, the Finex Stingray. There's definitely better lights, but for the money, in all the lights I've used Current, I've used Nycrew, Finex Stingray, several of the other kind of knockoffs. I gotta say, for the money, it's the best thing that I've used so far. The Nycrew Premium 20-inch lights for a 10-gallon tank, though, for the money, those things bang. They put out a lot of light, and the tanks I'm using on, I'm getting good results. But in the future, I'm setting my 10s up in a rack system where one 36-inch Stingray could cover two of them, put in, so you're looking at the long dimension. I'll probably do that because it's about the same money, and I think it's a better light. But start low tech. Try to find places, if you can, or friends, family, fellow hobbyists, where you can start out with plants that were grown in a tank, submerged, not immersed. Immersed means the bottom of the plant's in water about that deep, and then the leaves grow above the water. Almost all the plants you will buy online were grown that way. It's okay, but you're going to have problems with them. They can get all the CO2 they want from the oxygen, from the atmosphere. They can pump all of the fertilizer they want into those plants in the water because there's no fish in there, and the plants don't get any algae on them. So you can understand why a producer wants to do this. So what will happen, you'll get a plant, it'll look okay, but it kind of looks sad already because they shipped it. You stick it in your aquarium and it starts to have leaves die and discolor. Sometimes it almost melts back and it starts to regrow. And what you'll notice a lot of time, the leaves that come up look different than the leaves that were on it when it got to your house. There might be a different color, a different shape, a different form, a different size. That's all okay. And I'm not saying not to buy plants online because a lot of times we have to. But if you can find a hobbyist, even a hobbyist selling online, that says, I'm growing with no CO2 in a tank and selling my surplus, then when you get that plant and put it in your tank, it's just going to start growing. And you're going to have better results. It's important to know this, one, because if you can, you should, as far as get those plants. And if you don't, when you get those plants and they kind of just, and you only see like a couple little new leaves coming off in a week, you're like, oh good, it's working, instead of thinking you did something wrong. So that's another really big tip, and that's something I learned this year. I didn't know anything about that until this year, and it's made my life a lot better, and it's made me see opportunities for hobbyists to do online plant sales, online plant trades, things like that. If you are doing any hardscaping, and this is something I did know, because even when doing silk plants the same way, set up your hardscape and then set up your plants. Remember the rule of thirds. Don't take your big piece of hardscape and stick it all the way to one side, and definitely don't stick it right in the middle like an island. You'll just never be happy with the flow. Kind of 1/3 to one side is where your primary hardscaping feature, in most cases, will make the most sense. Do what you like, but fiddle with the hardscape first. Next, think about this. If you put a lot of hardscape in, yeah, we can glue plants to it and whatnot, but you seriously limit the floor space for your plants that go into the substrate. So really think about it if that's what you really want to do. And I have started to pull back and do less hardscape so that I can have more plants. And I think in your first tank, like if you're especially going to start with a 10 or a 20, maybe a little bit of hardscape just to give some cover and stuff for the animals to interact with, a single piece of lace rock or something like that, but leave as much of it open for as much plants as you can. Because if you're going to get multiple tank syndrome, and most of us are, when you do that, what's going to happen is you're going to have this nice little farm. And when you're like, you know what, I want to set up a 55 next, and you wait and somebody runs a deal on a 55 kit or something, even though you throw half of it away, it's cheaper than buying a tank, and you set that tank up, instead of going out and spending all this money on plants, you're just going to start pulling plants out of that tank. And let's say you want to set up with nanofish, like my bottom 55 out in front of here, and you want shrimps. You pull shrimps out of there. Maybe you have another tank you're growing guppies in or something, and a couple little 10-gallon tanks, and you can start seeding all these bigger tanks. So I think that really is what I would say to you when you're considering these tanks. Next, I really think it makes sense with the planted tank world when you're new to it. Start with nanofish. Now, not necessarily every fish has to be classified by some expert as this is officially a nanofish, but smaller fish, fish that do well with shrimp, and include shrimp if you can. I think, again, if a shrimp can go in a tank, I think a shrimp should go in a tank. I think your first tank, it makes a lot of sense to not put any, even though you can breed shrimp with fish, even in smaller tanks like 10-gallon tanks, it makes a lot of sense to get that first batch of babies past the pick-off size, up your population, and then say, you know what, I want to breed some kind of guppy in here or something like that with them, and then add them later. Lots of cool little fish you can use. In mosquito rasboras, chili rasboras are cool as hell. Celestial pearl danias are one of my favorite little fish. Asian stone catfish are totally fish safe, and they're cool little fish. Corridoras are generally shrimp safe. Autocinclus, like, start with those types of fish and use a little fish at a time. You know, if you're going to do guppies, you know, use the ratio of what, 1 male to 2 females, or 1 male to 3 females, and that's all, because you're going to have more than you know what to do with pretty soon after that. But start with smaller fish and snails and shrimp and kind of go from there. Next, don't worry about snails. I mean, I need to control the snails. Stop it. Healthy aquatic systems have snails. Don't buy tissue-grown plants to avoid snails. Screw it. Snails are fine. They're fine. You're going to end up primarily, if you don't purposely stick a snail in your tank, the two you're most likely to end up with are what everybody calls a pond snail. They're like a Fertilix is their actual name snail. The little snails that end up in every tank. They're great. They do a good job, especially if you grow shrimp. Shrimp love snail poop. And ram's horn snails, which are the bigger ones that look like a ram's horn. They're actually pretty cool looking snails. Everybody's worried about a population explosion. If you get a population explosion of snails, you have overfed your fish and in your tank. Because you can't sustain an overpopulation without enough food to do it with. That said, if you're pumping enough food in there because you're trying to breed the hell out of shrimp, you can get the snails start to build up. Don't worry about it. It's simple. You can get rid of a couple hundred of them at a time with almost no work. Get a cup, like a little ramekin or something like that. Stick an algae wafer in it. And when the lights go off at night, stick it in the bottom of your tank. When you come in the morning, it'll be full of snails. Just take it out. You can control your snail population. You never have to worry about them getting out of whack again. I like to use ram's horns. I like Malaysian trumpets. I like nertite. And I like pond snails. And you can do whatever else you want, but don't worry about them. Don't freak out. If you do need to reduce the population, algae wafer in a cup. Easy to go. Next. In spite of what everybody tells you, yes, you do get algae in tanks even when everything is well balanced. There's no algae in a well-balanced tank. You're a moron if you say that. That's one place where I will, like I'm saying, you can believe whatever you want, think whatever you want, I'm just giving you my opinion. No, I think if you think that you don't get any algae at all in a tank that's balanced, you're a moron. You don't know how biology works. There's well-balanced ecosystems all through the world with algae in them. Algae is part of a natural system. Well-balanced tanks don't get out of control with algae. That is a true statement. But if you have some algae show up, don't start freaking out thinking you've done something wrong and you need to tear the whole tank down, especially if it's something like hair algae or diatom algae. remove what you can, control your feeding, look at your tank parameters, do a water check, do a change if you need to do it, and roll on with life, and don't get so uptight about it. Yes, even the best tanks get filled with algae. I can't think of the guy's name, but it's the guy that the Amano shrimp was named for. I guess it's Amano. He was like the aquascaper, supreme with nano tanks. He threw tons of those shrimp in every tank because they eat even black hair algae. So if he had to do it, you probably are going to have to do something about it too. Don't freak out about it. Don't lose your mind. Next, start with easy plants. Start with easy plants. Let me give you my list. I want to read this so that I don't miss any of what I have written down here. Here's my favorite plants. Vallisneria, Dwarf Sagittaria, Water Wisteria, Water Sprite, Anubias species in general, Rotala species. I really like Rotala indica. Java moss, Amazon sword, Ambula, and pearlweed. Ambula is really cool. It kind of sort of looks like hornwort. I've had a lot of great luck with that plant. Pearlweed I'm just starting to play with, but I really like the potential for it. But start with easy plants. Now, if it's a stem plant, which means you can just cut it off and stick it in substrate and it'll grow. And even if it's something, well, you probably should have CO2 for. If you can get cuttings for free from a friend, stick it in there, see what happens. If it doesn't grow, pull it out. It's no big deal, right? And that's get as much as you can, one of each of what should grow for you. Put it in your tank and see what you're able to grow well. And then make that the foundation as you build out other tanks. You'll save tons of money that way. And as you end up with surplus, share with friends and they'll trade back to you. A lot of my plants, my buddy Nick came over. It's like, here, I got this horrible weed. You'll probably love it. What's it called? It's water wisteria. People are like, you gotta have CO2 for that. Put it in my tank. Okay, no you don't. All right. So if you can get it for free, stick it in there, see if it grows. If it doesn't grow, quit trying to figure out how to grow something else. There's tons of stuff. Something will grow well for you. And a lot of times, as tanks mature and you get more stuff to grow in them, more stuff will grow in them, even without CO2 injection. Next, consider adding some floating plants. I've seen people have mixed emotions on this because, yes, it's going to block some of your light out, but if you're doing a low-tech tank with, mid-range quality lighting, the plants you're growing don't need that much lighting anyway, and there's a solution when you get too much top growth. It's called your hand and bucket. And it's just takes them out. I just think it does way too much good to not have it. You have an excess nitrate buildup, throw duckweed in the top of that tank, and it will suck that sucker out like crazy. And then what do you do with the extra? You sell it, you give it away, or you compost it. I take, a bucket, a 5-gallon bucket filled about that deep, and I don't have that many tanks. About once every 2 weeks, I really pare down my top growth. I'll end up with about that much. I take it out and I have a pit that my chickens and ducks, waller, and all the scrapes go out there. It makes fantastic compost. You think about all that surplus nutrient, now we're going to take it and put it in our plants. If you don't have compost, go out, if you're an apartment dweller, find a shrub that you care about and just sprinkle it around there and let nature take its course. Don't be afraid of it. If you need to build some sort of an excluder, there's a bunch of ways to do it. You can take PVC pipe, 1/2-inch PVC pipe, and the fittings, you can build anything with PVC pipe. Build yourself a little floater that does what you want it to do. Get some Krylon Fusion black paint, paint it with that. You don't even notice it sitting up there. That's the easiest way, and it's better, in my experience, with keeping things from getting under and over than the little thin ones made out of like acrylic tubing. But you can do whatever you want there. But definitely consider using some floating plants. And you can float plants that we don't generally think of as floating plants. I mentioned water wisteria, it floats well. Water sprite actually is a fern, and as it looks a lot like wisteria, but as it grows, you can actually grab hunks of it and kind of tease it. It'll pull off and form its own thing, and you can float those around and they'll grow. I use water lettuce, which is a true floating plant as well. Pearlweed you can float. So if you can float it, think about floating it. If you don't like it, you can always take it away. I also guess I did mention Java moss in my list, but I love Java moss. People say if you put it in a tank, make sure you want a tank, because it will always be in a tank. I have found that to be sort of true, but I haven't ever found it to get so out of hand that it's difficult to control. And if you pull all of it out, yes, it'll eventually come back, but no, it's not a big deal. And you will never have a hard time selling Java moss, especially grown in a low-tech tank by the bucket load to your local aquarium stores. It's one of the things they can never get. They never have it, and when they do get it, it was always grown immersed, and as soon as you put it, just melts the crap. So if they say no, and you say, hold on, I do want you to know, I'm growing this in the water with no CO2, and that means when you sell it to a customer, it's going to stay exactly the way it is. It's going to do well for them. And I have found that even some very experienced shop owners don't know this. I've talked to quite a few shop owners now that when I explain the whole immerse thing and why plants melt and stuff like that, they had no idea because they're just trying to make a living. A lot of guys are just trying to make a living. You know, maybe they go into it, they love the hobby, they're more into saltwater or something like that. They're not really into planted tanks. So a lot of times you can end up getting business with these people by being their information source. If you're a bit humble, don't go in there like you got an ego or something because, hey, I'm the one with the store. But if you explain that a lot of times, I'm like, hey, if you tell your customers this, and all of a sudden you're selling them things like Valsneri and stuff like that because now they understand it, now they can educate their customer to it, now they'd rather buy from you. You know, because most of these stores don't sell a ton of that stuff. They sell a few plants here, a few plants there. You know, maybe they sell 10, 20 pieces of Valsneri a week, sometimes less. A hobbyist with a few tanks could probably keep up with most of that demand. And they're going to have happier customers. So that's just something to think about as well. Next, don't get married to a tank. When I went to some training for landscape design and what we call permaculture and designing ecosystems in hardscapes and things like that, what they always taught us was when you're doing your drawings on like tracing paper and what all, call it trash. Call it trash. Because then you'll be free to do whatever you want with it. And you won't get upset with it because, gee, you can change it with an eraser or just get a new piece of paper and throw it away. I'm not saying to go to that extreme with your tanks, but especially if you're setting up like your first 10-gallon planted tank, that tank's not going to be there 27 years from now. You're going to get to some point where you're going to go, I want to do something else with that tank. And you're going to tear, or if it's a tank, if it's a glass and silicone tank, sooner or later it's going to leak. You have to tear it down to reseal it. So you're going to do something different with it. So just enjoy the experience. Let it be what it is. And understand your first tank is not going to be like a gold cup. I don't know what the hell they call it in the world of planted tank competitions. But you're not going to be that with it. Just enjoy it for what it is. And don't get attached to the long-term life of the tank. Next, get a laser temperature gun. All right, get one of these guys right here. I don't know if you guys can see the laser that way. These things work. They are accurate. I have thermometers on most, not all of my tanks. My new little nano tanks, I was like, I'm not buying a thermometer. I got 2 of these. 2 is one, 1 is none. Anytime I go over to my tanks and I shoot that tank with this thing and then I check the thermometer, it's within 1 degree. If you're getting fiddly and farty over 1 degree, you're being too anal about your temperatures. And another thing, my real experience with animal husbandry is in the world of reptiles and amphibians. I was a herpetologist long before I was, into fish. And I don't understand you people that are freaked out. Well, this end of the tank is 2 degrees colder than this end of the tank. Good, that's called a thermogradient. And animals, including fish, will do what's called thermoregulation. If they're not comfortable, they'll move. So if your tank actually has some different temperature zones, that's ideal. Most of my aquatic experience is in aquaponics and ponds. And when we design a pond system, even one that's built on something like stock tanks or pond liners or something like that, we design that system to have thermogradient. Because that's how real ecosystems work. A pond, a stream, a lake, even in the tropics where a lot of these fish come from, it's not the same temperature everywhere. It's okay. But get one of these, and I think you'll find yourself enjoy. And here's what I like to do. I don't like to buy something, and it's only for one thing. I'm not going to get into it, but I'll put a link to my review on these of all the different stuff I use these things for. So instead of buying a little thermometer that I stick in every tank to go look at, and it gets plants growing around it, and I'm trying to see it, and I can't really see it or whatever. I come in, when I check on my tanks, I pick this up, bam, 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 and I know. But when I make beer, and I want to know if the wort's chilled enough to put yeast in it, Boom. When I go out to one of my big 1,500-gallon rain catchment tanks outside, and I want to know how much water's in that tank, I take this sucker and I go up the side of it, and when I see a big temperature change, I know that's how much water it's holding. And there's about a dozen other things I do with this thing all the time. And to me, that makes a lot more sense. About 20 bucks one time, or $10 to $15 for every tank for a different thermometer. I know big breeding operations and all, you got to do things differently. For the hobbyist, I just think you'll find you'll be okay if you use this. Next, initially, water changes make sense weekly. That weekly 20%, whatever. There are some species of fish or whatever, you want to do a lot of water changing because it stimulates breeding and stuff. If you have a well-balanced planted tank and you come in for your weekly maintenance and you check it and you do your test on it, however you decide you're going to test it, and everything's good, the only thing you can do by changing the water is mess it up. Seriously. All you can do is it's all the readings are golden. Well, let's change the water. It's an unnecessary action. Top the tank up, leave it alone for another week, maybe go to monthly. And I mean, I've seen some of the guys that really know what they're doing. I'm talking, these guys on YouTube like Corey, like the King of DIY, etc. say, "Oh, this tank? Oh, I haven't changed the water. I haven't done a water change this tank in 3 months." So I trust them because they live this life. And frankly, my best tanks are tanks that I don't do constant, continuous water changes in. As far as testing, I do test once in a while. I don't test that much. I'll talk about one of my indicator species here in a little bit because I'm almost done with this now. Next up, clean your glass before you notice algae on it. I think I blended that into another one of my bullet points, but definitely do that, whether it's with something like this, whether it's with a handled scrubby. If you do that, whenever you do weekly maintenance, you just hit all the glass, you will get very little buildup of algae. It just won't have time because it builds kind of over time. And then you end up with like that green spot algae, and it's really hard, and then you're out here with one of these scraping the hell out of it, which will work, but you'll do a lot less of this kind of scraping if you just do a basic glass clean with your weekly maintenance. That's more important for algae control, at least on the glass and water changes in my experience. Unless you can automate your water changes. So let's say you can set up, I've seen some really cool setups here on YouTube, guys, where, basically just turn the water on, water comes in, pushes the water out, water goes down a drain. If you can do that, shit, do that shit. Okay? Because that is slick and it saves you time, and the easier your hobby is, the more you'll enjoy it and the more you'll do of it and the more tanks you'll eventually have, which is great, okay? If you can't, get a Python. This shit with jiggle siphons and buckets and crap, no, screw that. Life's too short. Invest in a Python. I'll put a link in the notes to the review that I did on it. I got one. I have a 2-foot tube on it, and I got a 4-foot tube on it. I got IBCs out in my aquaponic systems that are 4 foot deep, and every once in a while, as they build up a little bit too much detritus on the bottom of there for the tilapia and stuff like that, I'll go in and take some of that out, and all those solids are a great nutrient for my outdoor systems as well. But I have a stacked 55 set up where my lower 55-gallon tank is only about that far off the floor. And I thought that was a dumb idea until I saw the Python. Basically, you can, if you have an adapter, you can hook it up to a sink in your house, and the water goes right down the drain. I open my window over there, throw the Python through, hook up a garden hose, turn it on, suck water out for a change, and even when I'm not doing changes and I'm just topping my tanks off, it's so fast. It's so fast. Now, I'll admit, I have a well. Okay, I don't have to treat my water. That makes all of this a bit easier for you. But people that think you have to treat the water before it goes into the tank, when you're doing something like a 20%, you don't. Put the water in the tank, throw the dechlorinator in, everything will be fine. Another thing, stop worrying that the water you're putting in your tank isn't exactly the same temperature as the water in the tank. Fish can handle temperature changes. It happens in nature. Now, if you're doing a 50% change, and you're doing it in wintertime, and your water's coming out of the ground, if you have a well, for instance, and it's usually out, how does water get to your house? It goes through the ground anyway, right? So that water's coming out, and it's coming out at like 45 degrees where it tastes like good cold drinking water, and you're doing a 50% water change, and your water is at 70 degrees, it's going to drop the hell out of that temperature. But most of the time, your water, because it's in the ground, is going to come out around 60 to 65 degrees. If you do a 10 to 15 to even 20% water change, it doesn't have that big of a temperature swing on the fish in your tank. We're not talking about a fish that was in a bag that just got shipped. It's been in your tank. It's okay. I do it all the time. I don't lose fish after water changes. If I lose fish, it's another reason. And I don't lose them when I top off. And that includes shrimp. I have Neocardinia shrimp. I know some of the other shrimp, like the King Kongs and all, can be a lot more sensitive. Neocardinia, I think if you kill them, you've done something bad wrong. But don't get too sweated up over that. New plants. I don't have to get too worried about algae or whatever, but I do think it makes sense to treat new plants. You really don't know where they came from, where they've been, and what they're carrying along with them. It's like unprotected sex for your fish and your tanks and your other plants. A lot of people do the chlorine bleach method, and you can look that up if you want to. This is what I started doing. You go to Dollar General or wherever else has stuff like this where you live, and they sell big bottles of peroxide for $1. They sell little spray bottles for $1. That nozzle that goes on that spray bottle comes right off and just goes right on that peroxide bottle. A lot of guys are using this hack. If they have like blackbeard algae in their tanks, they put the whole bottle underwater and they spray underwater directly on the blackbeard algae. It'll turn kind of purple and die. It's kind of weird, but it works. Algae hates peroxide. Plants can handle some peroxide for a little while. When I get new plants in, what I do now, and I've got some algae issues in some places where I didn't do this, I take peroxide and I spray that plant down. I let it sit for about 5 minutes and I rinse it off gently with regular water. And I don't know that it's going to kill every single stinking bit of algae, and algae is going to be in your tank sooner or later. But the stuff that's just started, it knocks it back, and your balanced system doesn't prevent algae. It keeps it from getting out of hand, so let's not go seeding a bunch of it in there from some unknown source. That's the thing I'm doing. If you do bleach, I'm fine with that. If you just put it in a quarantine tank, I'm fine with that. If you say, screw it, I'm willing to take the risk, it's your tank, dude. Do whatever you want. I'm okay with that. I'm just telling you kind of what I do here. Next, this is like one of the really important things from what I'm seeing on social media. Do not judge your tank based on other people's tanks. They're not going to show you all the shit they screwed up. They're not going to show you their algal blooms, right? They turn off all their filters so the water's not moving. They clean every little speck, and they use a $5,000 camera to take a picture of a system that they put $5,000 into, and you went out and bought yourself a little AquaClear, you know, $15 10-gallon tank and some substrate, and it's your first shot. Don't judge your shit based on theirs. Judge it based on how it makes you feel and how you feel about the way it looks for you. So take those pictures, do that exam, share it. Be the person that's willing to say, hey, look, my shit's melted. Right? And when it happens, don't be like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Just be like, hey, look, this happened. Here's what I did. I'm going to show you a picture next week. We're going to see how this works out. And let people learn from it. So, again, it's a plan, right? If you are that upset at losing a $10 plant or a $5 fish, this hobby is not for you. It's really not. We should try to prevent it, but when it happens, we just learn from it and we move on. Next, in larger tanks, so when we move into like 40 breeders, even 29s to a degree, except they get a bit big and they have to go somewhere else sooner or later, but 55s and up, throw a standard Placo in there. Plain Jane, cheap old standard sail-fin Placo. They are excellent algae control fish. And I've seen a lot of people say, well, they don't eat all the algae. They don't eat all the algae, but they do a great job. And just their action, that constant action, is the same as you taking that scrubby and cleaning that glass. They do so many fantastic things, and they ask for so little, and feed the damn things once in a while. Give them some blanched zucchini or some algae wafers or whatever. Let them get big. They don't hurt nothing. They don't mess with nothing. And if you lose fish, when they die, they will eat the dead fish and prevent them from screwing up the balance of your tank. When they get too big, find somebody with a pond. And I don't mean a pond like a farm pond or like a park pond where they mess the ecosystem. Find somebody that's like outdoor water garden or something and throw them in there. Well, in the winter they'll die. Maybe. I know people that have overwintered them here in Dallas, and it's going to be 24 degrees on Friday or Saturday. It's going to be 24 degrees. So I know people, if they're big enough ponds, they have overwintered here. And if they die, they die. They're fish. I know some people are going to get really upset about that. But there's a point at which we have to understand we kill millions of fish every year to fry them up and eat them. We go out and we get minnows and we put them on a fish hook and we catch catfish with them and we eat them. In the end, they're fish. If you really, really are worried about the retirement of your Placo, then do that. And if you're so worried about it and you don't think you're going to have a place, then don't put one in there. But if it doesn't bother you, if you don't get ass hurt over it or whatever, big tank, throw a Placo in it, and it'll solve a lot of problems before they ever happen, in my experience. They will uproot some plants. One of my 55s, there's a big Placo in there. He kind of messes with everything, but he doesn't really hurt it, except Ludwiga. I come in every day, and there's all my little Ludwiga sprigs up on the top of the surface. He pulls them out. I don't grow Ludwiga in that tank. No big deal. It's worth it to have him there for all the other good that he does and just grow other stuff. As long as he's not pulling out the Rotala, we're good, right? Because I love that plant. Next up, schedule a day for maintenance once a week. For most of us, it's weekends. Even me, I work from home. I have my own business, but I work. I do my podcast every day, 5 days a week. I run a business, so Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays I have off. For me, it's Sunday early, before my wife's up and about. She wants to go do something or whatever. And I treat it like a job. So if I know that we're going to do something early Sunday, I either going to move it to the afternoon and make sure the time's scheduled, or pull it up to Saturday and do it early or late or whatever that fits around my wife's schedule. But I have a standard time. Early Sunday, I get up and I take care of my tanks. Treat it like a job, but don't let it become one. If you find things that you really don't want to do, automate it, eliminate it, or pare down and do less. Because if you take care of your maintenance, your tanks will take care of you. And maybe that means instead of having 10 tanks, you have 5. Maybe it means instead of having 5, you have 2. I'd rather you have 1 or 2 tanks and love them than have 5 tanks and hate them. Just saying. And then the last, enjoy the worlds you're creating. Because understand that's what we're doing. We're creating a little world. Little 3.5-gallon bowl. We're creating a world. Those animals that live in there, that's their world. That's all they know. That gives a certain sense of responsibility that we have to do it right. But it also should give us a sense of satisfaction. This is why I have to be careful. Like if I have something simmering on the stove and I walk into my office here and I pull up my little stool and I sit down in front of just one of my little stupid shrimp tanks. Next thing I smell food burning. Because I become part of that world with them. It's so much better than TV reruns. So when you put all this work and effort into it, it's not about putting a picture on freaking Instagram. I'm not saying not to do that. I do it all the time. It's fine. But what it's really about is being able to sit there and watch those animals interact. Watch them live and know that you've created an ecosystem, a little world, a little universe, all to itself. And as we get better at it, I'm all for reducing those. If we can eliminate filtration and do it all with plants, great. The more we can do, the better. The more we can master our craft, the better. And have fun with it and appreciate it for what it is. I hope you enjoyed this video. I didn't plan on it going an hour, but I didn't plan on it being 25 points either. It started out as going to be 10 things. And as I started writing this list, I just couldn't stop. I want to give credit to the people that I really, really appreciate out there. Again, Corey from Aquarium Co-op. Thanks, dude. You've helped me so much. I'm glad I've been able to give you some business. King of DIY. Awesome. Mark from Mark's Tanks. Awesome. And I'm leaving people out. I'll put a list down there because I want to go ahead and finish this up. But I'm going to tell you the best place to get information on planted tanks and fish tanks in general is right here on YouTube. These are great people. They know what they're doing. They live it every single day. And if they tell you something, you know it's true, but always accept the fact, because they do, that it may not be true for you. That you may be able to do something they say doesn't work for them. And that's what I love about these worlds we create. You learn something every day. You learn something every day. I have friends that know way more about this than me, and because I have the time to sit here and dick around with it, I'll be like, are you sure that plant you gave me was XYZ? And they're like, yeah, I'm pretty sure. And I'm like, I don't think it is. Check this video out. Here's how you tell it. So that's, you know, what about this fish? You know, I have a buddy, man, his wall, when you walk into his house, it looks like a pet store with tanks. And he's like, well, what kind of fish did you put in there? I'm like, celestial pearl danios. He's like, what are those? I had no idea they even existed. Well, hell, they weren't even in the pet trade until about 6 years ago. Who knows what we're going to come up with next? That's why this is so much fun. So enjoy those worlds you're creating. If you like what I had to say today, consider subscribing. If it made you upset, I'm sorry you're still watching. Anyway, guys, it's not what the channel's all about. I do have a podcast that's more on preparedness and lifestyle design called thesurvivalpodcast.com. You can find it at tspc.co. But there'll be a lot more aquarium content coming at least to YouTube. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, post them below. But just know, I gave you what I know, and I'll probably refer you to somebody else. Thanks a lot, and thanks for listening to me.